The 24-70 and the 24-105, two of the most useful and versatile lenses on any camera system. They both come with their trade-offs, of course, with the 24-70 having that wider 2.8 aperture, which is great for low light and extra background blur, but at the cost of a heavier lens with less reach and of course a much higher price tag. The 24-105 f4 usually comes in cheaper, in a smaller package, more lightweight, and tends to also have lens image stabilization too. Today I'm putting both of these lenses to the test for both portraits and travel to hopefully help you decide which of these lenses is the one for you. Let's get started. So first up, let's start with the usual, which is comparing key focal lengths on each lens using their wide open aperture to see the differences in background blur and separation. So let's get started at 24mm on the 24-105. And now on the 24-70 2.8. So both lenses do look very similar here, with the difference in aperture not being particularly noticeable until we take a closer look. Now you can see in the flowers above the model that they are rendered a little smoother on the 24-70, thanks to that 2.8 aperture of course, but it is very close and only really noticeable when zooming in and not when looking at the images as a whole. Now let's get in closer at 35mm and 50mm on both lenses. This is my first time using the 24-105 and I'm really impressed with the image quality of this lens. It's razor sharp next to the much more expensive 24-70. And looking side by side at 35mm, we do see a more obvious difference in the amount of background separation, but to me the f4 images do look just fine. Looking at 50mm, it's more of the same. I think there's more than enough separation on the f4 images, but you can spot that difference, particularly in the way the 2.8 lens just tames the busy texture of the tree in the top left of the frame. Now onto 70mm, which is the longest focal length on the 24-70 of course. The differences do diminish a little bit. First of all, I noticed the 24-105 is a little sharper here, but the difference between background blur is not as drastic as it was at some of those shorter focal lengths. But of course, the 24-105 can go beyond 70mm to two other key portrait focal lengths, 85mm and 105mm. So let's see how they compare against the 70mm 2.8 result. Here's the difference in working distance between 70mm and 85mm, barely an extra step back, so very similar. That step back though will give us some more background compression. At 85mm, it's easier to fill the frame with background and remove distracting elements. It's also a more flattering focal length for facial features, and in terms of background separation, I would say at f4 it's very close to the 70mm 2.8 result. But what do you think? Now onto 105mm, here's a reminder of 85mm, and now here is 105mm. And I love the 105mm results from this lens at f4. Thanks to that longer working distance, I think the amount of background separation is very similar against a 70mm 2.8. And again, I like that it brings the background in closer and gives a more flattering rendering of facial features. But again, let me know what you think. So we have established the differences between 2.8 and f4 at most focal lengths is pretty apparent, right? Well, let's see how obvious the differences are between these lenses in a more real-life scenario shooting around the grounds. I'm going to show you two images, one taken on each lens, and see if you can guess which one is shot with the £2,000 24-70 and which one is with the much cheaper 24-105. I'll reveal the answers after showing both the images. So starting off in this greenhouse, which of these two images is shot at 2.8? Can you tell? So the image on the left is the 2.8 lens. But how about these two? This time the 2.8 image is on the right. The giveaway is in the smoother rendering of that tree in the top left of the frame. In practice, the two images look very similar though. Now in this next image, I'm not trying to isolate the model from the background, but I do want to show the scale of the background. The versatility of the 24-105 lets me get a telephoto style focal length, making the background look larger than life. A good example where I don't see any noticeable difference in background separation, but the longer focal length can give you more creative freedom. So it's the 24-105 on the left, where I used 105mm to really bring that background forward in the frame. So back to a more standard portrait crop, pay attention to the backgrounds and see which you think is doing a better job at taming the busy elements behind the model. The image on the left is shot at 2.8, where you can see the background is a little smoother above the model. Now in this final portrait scene, there's a clear winner for me between these two shots. Which do you think is shot at the wider aperture? The image on the left was shot on the 24-105 at 105mm. With both lenses at their longest focal lengths wide open, I really love the 105mm f4 results. So as we can see, it really is situational how much of a difference those maximum apertures can make in the real world. It's often much closer than you think. However, one area the 24-105 has a clear advantage is in versatility, particularly for things like travel and landscape. Here's an example. With the 24-70, this scene is just too busy at 24mm, so I want to zoom in to cut out some of the unnecessary elements. Now 70mm does a great job at this, but look how much more you can zoom in practice at 105mm. Here I've totally isolated the viaduct and church, and I can get various crops picking out interesting elements in a busy landscape, all with a single lens. It is worth bearing in mind that of course you can always crop the 70mm image, and that will give you generally excellent results for things like social media, but you'll of course lose some quality. You can see that here, the uncropped 105mm image is much more crisp and retains more fine details than the 70mm cropped image. This could be important for things like landscape photographers and if you're planning on printing your images.
So this is a perfect example of the 24-70 not quite being long enough for the perfect shot, and where that extra reach of the 24-105 comes in really handy.
Here's another travel style example of the 70mm not being quite enough to eliminate those busy, distracting elements from the frame. 105mm gave me a much cleaner composition here. I'm not saying either of these images are great, but hopefully a useful real-world example where when you can't get close enough with 70mm, 105 can be really useful. These lenses are two of the best choices for portraits in the studio too. Let's see the difference between 70mm and 105mm when shooting headshots in the studio. Here's the 70mm shot, which looks great, but pay attention to the 105mm shot and how it affects face shape and facial features. 105mm gives you a much flatter image, facial features are less exaggerated, and you get that more classic portrait look. Side by side, you can see how much of a difference distance to subject and focal length can make in a headshot. Strictly talking rendering, which of these looks do you prefer? For what it's worth, the model preferred the 70mm shot. The Canon RF 24-105 f4 is literally the perfect size and weight on their full frame bodies. It's so comfortable to use and has an excellent build quality, and even has built-in lens image stabilization, which on most mounts the 24-70 doesn't. This smaller lens will fit into most backpacks a lot easier too. The lens extends when zooming and has the standard focus and stabilization switches on the body. Don't get me wrong, the 24-70 is one of my favourite walk-around lenses. Without comparing it to the 24-105, I wouldn't usually complain about its size and weight. It's never bothered me considering just how versatile this lens is. It also extends when zooming, and as the Canon RF 24-70 also has lens IS, it has the exact same switches too. Here's a look at the two side by side where you can see the difference in size between them. Interestingly, once both are fully extended, they are actually almost identical in size. Honestly, in general, both of these lenses are some of the best handling, well-built, versatile, sharp and fast focusing lenses I have ever used, and you cannot go wrong with either. So I hope you enjoyed that comparison between these two amazing zoom lenses. Let me know down in the comments which of these lenses you would go for and why. These really are do-it-all lenses, and for me, they are both excellent options when it comes to portraits and travel. Personally, I'll be keeping the 24-70 just because I have other prime lens options for when it comes to portraits. I've definitely missed the 24-105 for things like travel, for studio shoots, and for video. I just can't justify keeping both, even though I really wish I could. If you're looking for a great starter setup on full frame for both photo and video, I don't think you can do much better than a 24-105 f4 zoom lens, along with a cheaper prime, something like Canon's nifty 50mm 1.8 lens. That two lens combination will have you covered for 95% of situations. So there's a link in the description to some of the comparison shots from this video so you can download them and take a look at the differences for yourself. I hope this video helped. Thank you so much for watching as always, and I will see you guys next time.